You might be wondering, can I really live in France without a car? Maybe you don't want to deal with the hassle. Maybe you're concerned about the expense. And I totally get it. When you're planning a move to France, this is a huge concern. You might be thinking, but what about visiting friends in the countryside, going wine tasting? What if you get invited to someone's house for lunch and they live in a village outside of town that doesn't have frequent bus service? What if you just want to take a spontaneous afternoon road trip to explore? Dijon, the city where I live, is so great in part because you don't need a car to live here most of the time. My city is very walkable, the public transportation is quite good, the bike paths are decent, but sometimes you find a secondhand dresser on Le Bon Coin and the seller lives 30 minutes away. What do you do? In fact, only 13.8% of French people live without a car. The report that I found said the smaller the town, the higher the chances of car ownership. But when you consider that the average car in France costs 416 euros per month to operate, you may seriously want to consider alternatives. Here's my situation. I have this little car that I barely ever drive because I usually just get around Dijon by other means, walking, riding my bike, or taking public transport. I recently calculated that I drive my car about 600 kilometers or about 400 miles per year. And I should mention that we do have access to my husband's company car that we are allowed to use on the weekends and during vacation. So we do actually have a more modern sort of family car that we can use for longer trips as well. So I've been wondering if I could just get rid of my car and maybe use the car sharing program that we have here instead whenever I really do need to use a car. I started wondering if using Citiz, the car sharing program that we have here in Dijon, could be a more cost-effective alternative. So I decided to test it out. I signed up for Citiz, I borrowed a car one morning, I ran the calculations, and here's what I found out. I'm Susie, I'm American, and I've been living here in Dijon, France since 2008. Before we get started, I just wanted to remind you that you can sign up for my email newsletter by scanning the QR code here or by clicking in the link in the video description below. So if you live in France like I do, you'll most likely be able to walk to the bakery, take the bus to appointments, bike to the market. That's the easy part. But what if you want to go hiking in the woods or take a day trip to the mountains? So I tested France's car sharing system, Citiz, to try to imagine if it could handle all of these scenarios. I've seen their cars all over town for years, and I've always been curious about the system, but because I have my own car, I never signed up for the service, and I never really needed to use one before. And in my recent travels for this channel, I've noticed that Citiz is present in all of the cities I've visited recently. I saw it in Besançon, in Nancy, and just last weekend in Annecy. And in fact, there are Citiz car share programs all over France. In fact, look at their website. There's a really long list, in fact, of towns where you can access these cars. But before we get into how it works, there's one question that Americans definitely need to have answered first. Can you even use Citiz if you only have your American driver's license? For some reason, I was under the impression that you had to have a European driver's license in order to be able to sign up for Citiz. And I looked through the contract, the 9-page contract that they sent me, to see if there was any indication of that, and I didn't see anything. And then I also just saw a video on YouTube, an excellent video where Sue, the French expat, talks about her experience recently signing up and using Citiz as well. And she mentioned in her video, which is very good, you should definitely check it out as well, that she was able to sign up using her Texas driver's license. So I was a bit confused. Yesterday, I decided to call the customer service at Citiz just to get a clear understanding. And they, in fact, told me that it is possible to sign up for Citiz if you have a non-European driver's license. However, they're going to ask you to fill out a certificate, une attestation, and you need to provide a certified translation of your driver's license as well. So that's something to keep in mind as well. As an American, when you move to France, you can drive using your American driver's license for 1 year after you establish residency here. But within the first year of living here, you need to exchange your American driver's license for a French driver's license if you are lucky enough to have an American license issued by one of the following states. Here's the list as of 2024. So if your driver's license is from Delaware, Maryland, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Virginia, South Carolina, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Illinois, Iowa, Michigan, Wisconsin, Arkansas, Oklahoma, Texas, Colorado, Florida, or Connecticut, you can do a direct exchange without having to take the French driving test. The bad news, if you're not from one of those reciprocal states, you'll have to pass the full French driving test, the written test, and the road test. I personally had to do this way back when, and it was long and frustrating and expensive. So good luck to you if you fall into this category. You have my complete sympathy, but also my encouragement. If I can do it, you can do it. And even if your license does convert, I would highly, highly recommend looking into learning a little bit about French road rules, which are slightly different than in the US. The rule that's most confusing for me personally is priorité à droite, which means that anybody coming from your right-hand side has a right of way. So you have to yield to people that are coming from your right. And in fact, I made a whole video about this on my channel, which I'll link to up here, which you can check out if you want to learn more about that, because it's something that I still find confusing to this day. And it's definitely something that you need to be aware of if you're going to be driving in France. Okay, so here is how the process of signing up for Citiz worked for me. On October 5th, I registered online and I had two options. Either I could choose a free 3-month membership, in which case I would have paid more per hour for my rentals, or I opted for the membership that cost 40 euros for a 3-month trial, but that gave me access to a lower hourly rate for the car rentals. But I wasn't verified yet, so it wasn't like I could just go out and grab a car that same day. After I finished the online application process, I received an automatic email which said that verification of my account would take 1 to 2 days. So actually the next day, October 6th, I got the verification email that said that my account was all set up and ready to use. The next day, October 7th, I downloaded the app onto my phone and I just started looking around, trying to understand the price structure, looking at the different types of cars, where they were located, etc., just getting used to how the app worked. The entire application process was kind of like everything in France. It was relatively simple. I was pretty patient and I just sort of tried to understand every step of the process. It was relatively complex at the same time. Like I had to take a photo of both sides of my driver's license, and then I had to have another photo of myself holding my picture ID. It's kind of like everything in France, a little bit complicated, but as long as you take the time and you're patient and you understand all of the steps and you do everything that they ask you to do, then you'll get through the process in the end. And just a few other things to note. I paid 40 euros for my 3-month trial, but there was a free option. But like I said, I think it cost more per hour. And going forward, if I decide that I want to continue my Citiz membership, I think it's going to cost me 16 euros per month. But if I continue to pay that membership, that means that I would be able to rent the cars at the lower hourly rate. In fact, the price structuring is still a bit confusing to me. I think I'm starting to understand, but that is something to consider and to take into account as well, depending on how much you plan on using your Citiz car share. And again, assuming I'm understanding this correctly, I think that during the first 3 months of my subscription, I can only use the local Citiz program. And if I wanted to, for example, use a Citiz in another city, I think I would have to call and ask them to activate my account so that I could use the Citiz in other places as well. So like I said, for example, last weekend I was in Annecy, and if I had wanted to use a Citiz car there, I think I would have had to call the Dijon branch ahead of time to ask them to provide me with access. If I did want to borrow a Citiz in another city, then I probably would just call the customer service hotline and ask them for help. And they have been very helpful. I've called them several times already. But I think it's just something to keep in mind that if you do want to borrow a Citiz car in another place, that you might just need to plan ahead and make sure that you have access in other places as well. And you can reserve up to just 5 minutes before you want the car, which is actually very convenient. Of course, that's assuming that the car that you want is available. So you can plan ahead, but it is also possible to reserve relatively last minute as well. The other question that I did ask the customer service person that I spoke to yesterday was about minimum reservation times, because that was not clear to me based on what was in my contract and what I saw online. So on the online platform, you do have to reserve for a minimum of 1 hour. But what the person on the customer service person explained to me yesterday was that the billing system doesn't necessarily charge you for the entire hour if you don't actually use the car for the entire hour. So the billing system charges in increments of 15 minutes, apparently, and it takes into account the number of kilometers that you've driven and the amount of time that you drove. But if you reserve the car for 1 hour and you wind up using it for 35 minutes, it is going to charge you in part for the 3 15-minute intervals that you did actually use the car. And then the last 15-minute interval, when you were not using the car, you still pay, but you pay less because you're not actually using the car. It was a bit complex, but that's what I understood from the person that I spoke to on the phone yesterday. Okay, but at this point, the setup is done. So now it's time to test it out and see if this can actually replace my car. Okay, so it was Sunday, August 19th at 9:45 in the morning, and I decided that this was the moment I was going to borrow a Citiz car. So my husband and I were going to drive down to Marcenay-la-Côte, which is just south of Dijon, and we wanted to get some drone footage of the village because I'm working on a video about the villages around Dijon. So I thought this would be the perfect opportunity. So I looked on the Citiz app, and I was actually really impressed with the selection and the number of cars that were available at that moment. Well, in fact, I decided I would reserve starting at 11 o'clock. There were cars of different sizes. There were lots of cars in my general vicinity. You could reserve a hybrid or a regular car. There were standard and automatic transmissions. There really was a great selection. So I just chose the cheapest model, and I chose a car that was right downtown, and I went ahead and I reserved it for 11 o'clock. So I reserved the car for 2 hours, and in the app, it said that it would cost 10 euros and 20 cents. But I think that was just the price for the reservation and not including the actual number of kilometers that I drove, because the final price was more than that. I'll tell you about that later. And then I had a moment of panic after I realized, okay, I have this reservation that starts in about an hour, but I have no idea how to actually access the car. I remembered that when I signed up online, there had been some mention of them sending a badge, like a card, I suppose, that you could use to access the cars, but I hadn't received anything yet. So in a moment of panic, I called the customer service, and I was worried too because it was Sunday morning, but someone picked up right away and explained to me that 15 minutes before the reservation would start, a little button would appear in my reservation on the app that I could click on and press start. And she said, "Don't worry. Once you press start, you'll see that there's step-by-step instructions that you follow, and that you'll be able to unlock the car directly from your phone." So we set out a few minutes later to go find the car and do our little errand. So from our house, we walked downtown to Théâtre, which is where we had reserved the car. And there were, in fact, three Citiz cars at that station. And like the person on the phone said, 15 minutes before the reservation was set to start at 11 o'clock, a little button appeared in the reservation that said start. So I pressed the start button, and that led to another screen where there was an unlock button. And so I held down the unlock button with my thumb, and then I realized that I actually had to release the button in order for the car to react. And so at the moment when I released the button, that's when I heard the car unlock. So we opened the doors, we looked around, and as you can see, the car was definitely not pristine in terms of cleanliness, but it was okay. There were a lot of dings on the exterior, many of which were labeled with little stickers indicating that Citiz was aware of the dings. And I realized that the app was asking me if I had anything specific to report about the car, and I said no. And I was also asked to evaluate the cleanliness of the car when we picked it up, which we rated as slightly negative because, as you can see, it was a little bit dingy. It didn't smell, however, and everything worked. And the keys and the gas card were inside the glove compartment as indicated in the app. And then I accessed the keys. The app asked me if I was ready to go, and I said yes, and off we went. So we headed down to Marcenay-la-Côte. We drove around, we parked, we played around with our drone, we got the footage that we were looking for, and then we got back in the car and we headed back to Dijon to park the car in the same place where we picked it up. So for the trip, we had taken the car for a total of 78 minutes, and we drove a total of 19 kilometers. So then we parked the car, we checked to make sure that everything was okay, that we hadn't forgotten anything. We indicated that we were done in the app, and we followed all of the instructions in the app, the step-by-step instructions as well. And then I was able to use the app to lock the door the same way I used it to open the door. And then it said, "We finish here. See you soon." So yeah, maybe that's something else to note as well, that the app was in English. So that was quite helpful. But the pricing structure was a bit confusing. I did want to mention that. So as I said earlier, it had quoted me, I thought, an estimated price of 10 euros and 20 cents. But again, it didn't know how many kilometers I was going to drive. So in the end, I drove 19 kilometers. And after we dropped the car off, relatively quickly, I received the bill. And so they knew how many kilometers I had driven and how long I had taken the car out for. And so the final price was 12 euros and 86 cents. So that was taking into account the amount of time that I had used the car and the number of kilometers that I drove. So gas was something that was also confusing to me. My husband had reflexes of someone who rents cars occasionally, and he was like, "Oh, I guess we have to fill up the tank before we drop it back off." And I thought, no, I don't think that's it. I don't think that's how it works. And that isn't, in fact, how it works. You only have to fill up the tank if, when you're set to return the car, it has less than a quarter of a tank. Because the price of the rental actually includes the amount of gas that you use as well. So the way that it works for Citiz is that there's actually a gas card in the car. So if you use the entire tank, what you do is you go to the gas station and you fill up the tank and you just pay with the card that is provided in the car. So you don't actually have to pay out of pocket to fill up the tank. But you are responsible for making sure that there is at least a quarter of a tank when you return the car to the original station when you're done using it. So for this particular trip, we didn't have to worry about gas. We didn't have to go to the gas station, or we didn't have to use their card to see how it worked or anything like that. But it seemed relatively straightforward. And overall, the whole process of actually reserving the car, finding the car, using the car, returning the car, all of that was really relatively smooth, straightforward, intuitive, really relatively easy. So when I got the final bill for 12 euros and 86 cents, I now knew that I had some concrete data and that I could set about trying to do my calculations to see if this solution really makes sense for me personally as a way to replace my little car that I hardly use. So I calculate that my little car that I barely ever use still costs about 50 euros per month just to maintain and operate occasionally. So that includes gas, which luckily I don't buy frequently, but also insurance, which is a monthly cost, and also the cost of maintenance, which comes up occasionally as well, and inspection, which has to be done every 2 years as well. So if we estimate 50 euros a month, 12 months a year, that's 600 euros a year. And like I mentioned earlier, I drive about 600 kilometers per year. So that comes out to about €1 per kilometer to drive my car. And the trip I took with Citiz was 12 euros and 86 cents for 19 kilometers. So that works out to about 68 cents per kilometer, which is significantly cheaper. So if we imagine that I drive about 600 kilometers a year and it's 68 cents for Citiz, that works out to 408 euros that I would pay for my Citiz usage over the course of the year. But there's also the monthly subscription fee. And if I opt for the 16 euros a month subscription fee, then that works out to 192 euros per year, plus 408 euros for the actual mileage or the kilometer price. And that works out to exactly 600 euros as well. So using Citiz or using my car, it works out to the exact same amount of money per year. Not exactly the dramatic savings I was hoping for that I was going to present to my husband as an argument in favor of getting rid of my car, but for me, I think the arguments in favor of not having a car are much stronger because I hate having to deal with cars. I think it's just such a hassle. So dealing with the registration paperwork, with the oil changes, with trying to find a parking spot, with all of those things, I just think it's just a headache. And again, because I just drive my car so infrequently, I don't think that it's worth the hassle. But for whatever reason, my husband is really attached to this little car, and he thinks that we should keep it just in case. And of course, I should mention that our car is completely paid off as well. And that originally, I think we paid something like 3,000 euros for it a long time ago when we bought it, I think back in 2019. So, but in my mind, I'm like, oh, we could resell the car and then we could take that money and do something else with it, something more productive than just having it sit in as a sunk cost in our little car that we never drive. But I guess we'll be keeping our car for now, unfortunately. But for someone who doesn't already have a completely paid off car just sitting in front of their house, I think Citiz is an amazing alternative to car ownership for someone like me who doesn't really drive that much, but who may occasionally need a car. So let's go back to the original question. Is it possible to live in France without a car? My answer is a categorical yes, especially when we have access to these programs like Citiz that you can use in those rare instances when you really need a car. Granted, I'm speaking as someone who lives in a city and who has access to public transportation and who lives in a place that's relatively walkable and easy to get around without a car. There are a few things to remember. Obviously, you need to live in a place that has a car sharing program like this. You need to plan ahead. You can reserve, you can do your reservations ahead of time to make sure that the car is available. When we were in Annecy last weekend, we drove around looking for cities to film, and a lot of the times we found empty parking spots. So last weekend, I think cities were quite in demand in Annecy. So that leads me to think that you maybe need to plan ahead. In Dijon, the morning that I was going to reserve a car, most of the cars were available. So I guess it kind of, again, just depends on where you live and, the maybe there's some seasonality or some times of the week when it's harder to actually get a car. So that's something to consider as well. And then also there's that hurdle of providing a certified translation of your American driver's license if you have just arrived in France. So that's something else to take into consideration. And then I think there's another calculation to do as well, to try to help you to decide which of the membership plans works best for you. So you can opt for the free plan, but then I think you pay more per hour when you rent a car versus the 16 euros a month plan, which I opted for, which allowed me to have access to the car at a cheaper hourly rate. Since I paid for 3 months access to Citiz, I'm hoping that I'll have another chance or an occasion to use it. But then again, I have my car sitting outside my house, so next time I need to use a car, I'll probably just lazily take the car that I have that's sitting right in front of my house that's ready for me to go. But again, Cities is really a great alternative, I think. And I did want to mention that there are several other alternatives in terms of car rental. There are services like Turo and Get Around, which allow you to rent cars from individual people. And here in Dijon, I have never used these either, but I looked around online and I saw that there were there was quite a selection. So again, I'm not sure if they're cheaper or more expensive than a traditional car rental agency because we have those too. Of course, we have Sixt and Hertz, I think, here in Dijon. But there's something else too that's funny. Here in Dijon, anyway, local supermarkets rent cars, including moving vans. Like the Intermarché here in Saint-Apollinaire or the Leclerc, which is on the outskirts of Dijon. But some of them also rent normal passenger cars as well. For example, these are some shots from the Carrefour parking lot in Quetigny, and they had all of these sort of vans, but also passenger cars that you could rent. And the Carrefour in Quetigny is accessible by the tram, so you could, if you lived in the city center of Dijon, you could just take the tram out to Carrefour, and you could rent a car for the weekend as you needed, if you had needed access to a car. So these services all have their own advantages and disadvantages as well. But it is important, I think, to remember that those services are available as well. So this experiment was really fun for me and reinforced what I believed before anyway, which is that you can live in a city like Dijon without a car. And then if you need a car, you have access to car sharing programs like Citiz. It's really convenient and easy and probably relatively cost effective as well. Now, I just need to think of some more arguments to convince my husband that we can get rid of my car and that we can use Citiz when and if we need access to a car. If you can think of some better arguments, some good arguments, let me know in the comments below. And just another reminder, for more info on Citiz, you can also check out Sue, the French Texpat's excellent video. I will link to that in my video description below as well. She did a really amazing analysis, very detailed, and combining our two videos, you will definitely have a good idea of what to expect if you want to sign up and then use Citiz. If you found this video helpful, please subscribe for more videos about real life in France. And if you'd like to watch more videos about my life in France, you can check out the playlist that I'll link to right here. And you can also sign up for my email newsletter for more practical information about life in France by clicking on the link in the video description below. Thank you so much for watching, and until the next time, à bientôt!